Hi, this is Roger in Finland, and today we're going to be comparing the Sony A7 III with the Sony a6400. There's a ton of videos comparing these cameras already, so I'm going to do it from our particular use case. We're going to be shooting a no-budget short film in black and white with some people from work, and that's our context. Let's talk quickly about the similarities and the differences, and then we're going to do some tests from image quality perspective. Well, starting from the similarities, both have great autofocus. The A7 III has more points than the a6400, but the a6400 autofocus is just fantastic. So here, both are comparable. And yes, I know that real filmmakers don't use autofocus, but I think we have established earlier that I'm not a real filmmaker, so we need autofocus working sharply and working nicely. Next point is picture profiles that gives us flexibility to work afterwards in post. And here both of them are very similar. Both of them can shoot in S-Log2, S-Log3, which is pretty useless in both cameras, so that's a similarity, or hybrid log gamma, HLG2. This is what I'm shooting right now, but if you have seen my video comparing the different profiles for black and white, you know that I have chosen S-Log2. You can go and take a look at that video. Because I will be recording everything externally through the Atomos Ninja 5, both cameras output 8-bit 422, so again, a similarity. Then when it comes to resolution and frame rate, both are capable of shooting 4K and 25p, which is what I'll be using for the short film. And last and definitely least, both of them use Sony menus. Let's talk then about some differences, and most of the differences are related to size. The very first one is sensor size. The A7 III has a full frame sensor and the a6400 an aps-c sensor. In practice, this means that the full frame sensor of the A7 III will be better at low light. It will also give a different field of view given the same focal length, and even if the depth of field is not dependent on the sensor size, if I use the same two cameras at the same distance from the subject in the same equal framing, which will be a different focal length, and with the same aperture in the lens, the A7 III will have shallower depth of field. That's a bit complicated topic, go and check and Gerald and Don that explains it really well, but in practice there will be some difference on that aspect as well. The A7 III can shoot at Super 35 crop as well in 4K, and according to some reviews, the footage is a little bit less sharp than the 4K full frame of the A7 III and also the 4K Super 35 from the a6400, but this is something that we will be testing today. The next size difference is the battery size. The A7 III uses the Z batteries, the Z100, and the a6400 uses the W50s. I think that the only A6000 series cameras that use the new battery is the A66000. That would be actually probably one of the reasons for me to upgrade to it, but the difference between the A7 III and the a6400 when it comes to battery life might be as much as double amount of time of filming. Finally, the last difference when it comes to size is physical size. The A7 III is quite much bigger and somewhat heavier. This is now about to get a little bit unfair because I'm going to add some elements to the comparison that could be used for both cameras, but now I'm going to tell you what was my setup for the last short film. I was using the A7 III, which weighs 650 grams, with the 16 to 35mm f4 lens from Sony Zeiss, which weighs a little bit over 500 grams. Then I had that mounted on top of the Ronin S, which is 1.8 kilos, and in addition I was using the Atomos Ninja 5, which has 300 grams. Then, to rig it all up, I had some elements from small rig, so let's say that all of that amounts for a couple of 100 grams, so we had a 3.5 kilo setup. Since that time I have downgraded from the Ronin S to the Ronin SC, so that's the weight that I'm gonna count now for comparing with the a6400. So the a6400 is about 400 grams, which is 30% less already than the A7 III. Then if I use the comparable lens, the 10 to 18mm f4 from Sony, that is just 225 grams, which is less than half of the 16 to 35 for full frame. This is one of the biggest difference between aps-c and full frame systems, the size of the lenses. Then the Ronin SC, it's 1.1 kilos compared to the 1.8 from the Ronin S. That's a lot difference. Then the Ninja 5 is the same, and the few small rig parts to rig it all up is all the same. But here we're talking from 3.5 kilos to 2.2 kilos. That's a lot different. Even if fairly so, I would be comparing both setups using the Ronin S, the difference in weight would be still of 700 grams, which is quite noticeable. And even if we don't have really long shooting days, they are long enough that my forearms, which I have some injuries and issues with them, will suffer, and I know that the lighter the setup, the more easy time I will have filming the short film. And then there's a physical difference that I don't think it matters, but it's there, which is the flip-up screen for the a6400. I use it for videos like this, that's super practical, but when it comes to shooting a short film where I will be behind the camera and behind the camera only, that's really not making a difference here. Even if I mentioned in the similarities that the picture profiles are the same, there's one difference in S-Log2 at least. In the A7 III, the minimum ISO for S-Log2 is 800, and for the a6400 is 500. And last but not least is the customizability, or how the everyday that would call the fiddliness. The A7 III just have more buttons to customize, so it's a bit easier to fiddle through while you're shooting or preparing the camera. The a6400, once you get used to the Sony menus, which, well, they are what they are, it's not so bad. I have more or less everything customized through the quick function menu, so I can reach quickly to everything, but the A7 III still has an edge because it's a bit easier as you have more customizable buttons. Alright, but then what matters? With all that said, what's the difference in image quality? Let's go and take a look. Because lenses do matter, I have a bit hard time deciding what am I gonna choose to do this comparison. So what I'll do is, I'm gonna have the a6400 with the Sigma 30mm f1.4, which should give the equivalent field of view of a 45mm in full frame, and then we'll have the A7 III with the Samyang 45mm f1.8. When it comes to field of view, they should be pretty similar. And now I'm going to show you the funky setup I have for this. So I'm mounting both cameras one on top of each other with the respective lenses. So I'm going to be shooting, again, this same scene. I'm going to shoot with S-Log2 since it's the profile that I have chosen to shoot the short film in black and white. I'm going to show you the image with a quick rate in black and white, which is what I'm after. And then we're going to punch in, zoom in, and take a look at what is the image quality, the sharpness, and which of the two do we like the most. Then, as a final test, I'm going to mount the Sigma 30mm f1.4 into the A7 III, and because of the lens, we're going to shoot in the Super 35 crop mode, so we're going to be able to compare the crop mode of the A7 III with the non-cropped or the full sensor readout from the a6400 using exactly the same lens. Forgive me about the flickering. If you want to know how to get rid of flickering in slow motion videos, please take a look at this video, but that only applies to slow motion. So now let's take a look at the results, and I think we have a couple of surprises, at least for me. Let's take a look first at the a6400 with the Sigma 30mm f1.4, totally ungraded, and this is how it looks. This is shot at f1.4, ISO 800, the shutter speed is 1/50, 25 frames per second, and the picture profile is S-Log2. Then this is a similar framing with the A7 III and the 45mm from Samyang. This is shot at f1.8 and everything else is the same settings. Because of that 1.4 to 1.8 difference, you can notice that the image is a little bit darker. Both are still between the limits, so it's something that we can fix in post, but be aware that both are a little bit different exposed. It was shot in 4K in both cameras, and now I'm delivering at 180. That means that I can zoom at least by a factor of 2 and still, in theory, not lose any detail. So here I'm comparing both clips, zooming by a factor of 2. Obviously the exposure is a little bit different, so I made a quick rate, which is basically just adjusting the overall exposure of the A7 III with the Samyang to match the a6400, and then I applied exactly the same color corrections, or in this case, remove all the saturation and then add some contrast to the image. This is more or less the look I'm going to go for, so that's why I want to compare them in this setup. And I have to say that both of them look pretty similar. If anything, I'm going to say that the Sigma and the a6400 look a tad sharper, but here I think I'm splitting hairs. I guess here to me the amazing thing is how sharp they are, both of them wide open. I am especially impressed with the Sigma 30mm f1.4. I know that it's supposed to be one of the sharpest lenses for Sony aps-c cameras, but still, how sharp it is at f1.4, to me it's almost mind-boggling, especially at the price point that this lens comes. If I still zoom in by another factor of 2, now we're in pixel peeping territory, so this is something that I'm not sure how good it is to evaluate the sharpness, but I would say still here that the a6400 has a slight edge, but I would have really hard time choosing between the two. Then what I did was to mount the 30mm f1.4 into the A7 III, and that will make the camera automatically go into Super 35 mode. What I read and heard in some reviews is that the Super 35 crop mode in the A7 III is not as sharp as the 4K. If I understood correctly, this is because in the 4K image is actually oversampling from all that information from the 24 megapixel sensor, while the Super 35 crop is not doing that. So 4K should be sharper. The disturbing bit is that I think that it's super sharp. At f1.4 with this 30mm lens for aps-c, shooting at super 35 in the A7 III. Actually, if I compare the A7 III shooting in full frame with the 45mm Samyang, I think that that is less sharp than the A7 III shooting in super 35mm with the Sigma f1.4. Basically what I'm saying is that the lens matters very, very much. We talk about the sensors, we talk about the cameras, how sharp they can be, and also about the super 35 mode is less sharp than 4K. But really, with these two prime lenses, which are comparable in price, even if one is for full frame and the other one in aps-c, I think that the difference is noticeable. Sigma is way better than the Samyang when it comes to resolution and sharpness for these cameras. Alright, so all this video was about me choosing what am I going to be using, the a6400 or the A7 III. One thing is clear, these Sigma lenses for aps-c are just brilliant. I have the 16mm and the 30, and that covers a lot of ground and it's going to fit really well because of the tight spaces that we're going to be shooting in. So I think I would be anyway wanting to use these Sigma lenses instead of the Samyang, at least when it comes to primes. I do have the Tamron 28-75 for the A7 III, which is what we shot our last film with, and it's super versatile and it's super useful, so I don't need to change anything ever, and I have a very, very useful range of focal lengths here to play with. But if we're going for a little bit better look, I think that these Sigmas are brilliant. Therefore, what I'm saying is that I want to be shooting with these Sigma lenses our next short film because they're just amazing. And if I do that, I'm going to be shooting in Super 35, either with the aps-c sensor of the a6400 or in Super 35 crop mode in the A7 III. Since I didn't find any really drastic differences in resolution, quality, sharpness, or anything for that matter between the two cameras, then it comes to practicalities. The A7 III has the more buttons, the more customizability, definitely the longer battery life, but the a6400, it will give me the way lighter body with the same image quality. I'm going to have to change batteries a little bit more often. I'm hoping still that with setting up everything as I want it in the custom function menus, I can access to almost everything I need. Because it's going to be in black and white, I don't need to care much about white balance. I know that I'm going to set the picture profile once. I'm actually going to set it home even before I go to the set. I know the frame rate and the shutter speed will be, so pretty much the only thing that I'm going to be changing is ISO, and that's it. And maybe I will change the aperture of the lens, but that will depend on how do we want to expose things and then what kind of depth of field do we want. With the 1.4 of the 16mm and the 30mm, I can definitely have enough room to have shallow depth of field if I want shooting in Super 35. So man, as much as I love the A7 III, I think that for the next short film, we're going to be shooting with the a6400. I didn't see that coming. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. And I would be very interested to hear who of you have been using the A7 III for short films and who of you are using the a6400 for short films, narrative work. It would be super cool to find more people that uses these cameras for short narrative films. So that's it for today. I will see you soon for some more content.